Welcome. You are here just in time for another Business Analysis Live. My name is Susan Moore. I'm the Community Engagement Manager at IIBA.
And I'm Scott Bennett. I'm the Manager of Business Analysis here at the International Institute of Business Analysis. Yes, thank you for joining us today. We have an interesting topic that we're going to talk about today and look at, and that's visual communication. Susan, we use visuals quite frequently in a number of different ways. And in this discussion today, I think will be insightful for a lot in terms of how we think about this.
Eye-opening, you might think, you might say.
Yes.
Yeah, we often think about the work that we do is about writing things down. I guess that's an aspect of it. But what happens when words don't tell everything that you need? In fact, probably we've all been bored by those really long specifications or whatever. And sometimes being able to think visually, to communicate visually is very often a better way to win the hearts and minds of the people that you're trying to get on board with something. So this is an exciting topic because I think it's a different way of thinking about the work that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And as always, we've got a guest that's joining us today. So here we've got Paddy. Welcome, Paddy.
Hey, Patty.
Hey, hey, Susan. Hey, Scott. So happy to be here. Honestly, I see you guys doing amazing things, and I'm really honored to be joining you today. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, we are excited you're here. I know it's been a minute because we've been talking about this since last year, and you and Grant, who can't join us today, have been super busy. We're going to ask you more about Visual Jam, but first, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, that's a dangerous question in public. So my name's actually Pardeep, but everyone calls me Paddy, including my kids now. So I just go with that. And it's a great way to get free drinks when you're in Dublin. You just mention at the bar your name. Every Irish person wants to buy you a drink. It's super cool.
Fantastic.
So, so I started off probably on the wrong foot. I sort of tell people about my education. I went to the worst performing high school in the UK. So it was the bottom of our league table that year. And yeah, I don't think things have improved much, but now I work in education, which is kind of interesting, that sort of contrast. But when I was younger, I loved art. I really wanted to make a career of it, but I guess at that time I was always told it doesn't pay the bills, and so I didn't take it seriously. And I got a proper job, got into software development, and discovered very quickly I wasn't very good at it. And then this thing called business analysis came along, and the way I discovered business analysis was I was paired up with a colleague who was from a sales background, and she had amazing people skills, and I was the techie guy, and the two of us partnered up, and I really loved what she was doing, the way she could get people engaged and all of that good stuff. And she was a professional BA, and she didn't even know it. And so I learned a lot from her, and then over the years went into more the business analysis side. Without boring you with my entire career history, worked for some big corporates like British Telecom, IBM, Deutsche Bank, and now I work for a big training company. They're the biggest tech trainer in the UK, and I get to head up their agile practice. So that's a bit about.
So as a business analysis professional, how did you stumble on, get into visual thinking?
Oh, great question. When I was working at Deutsche Bank, they foolishly gave me a role which was the head of agile education for the bank, and so I started delivering a lot of training, and it almost was by accident because I quite like to draw as I'm talking and to demonstrate concepts in a visual way, and I'd get some really nice feedback from some of the learners in the room, and they'd be like, "We love that, can we take a picture of it?" And then I discovered this thing called visual thinking, and I discovered it was a thing because there's a book on it that I found, which is this one here. It's a book by a lady called Wilhelmine Brand, and it is amazing because I didn't know it was a thing. And then when you look at the book, it's so visual and so easy to digest and get into, and it just accelerated the quality of my flip chart drawing, and I started learning the techniques, and it all really started from there.
Really? Wow. That's interesting. So
Yeah, that
remind our viewers that we are live today. So you're going to see a few mistakes as we stumble through this at times. But the advantage of us being live is you get to ask your questions, and we've got
mhm.
Paddy here that can answer them for you. So ask your questions in the comments. And as we chat through here, we will eventually get to those questions. So we'll cue those up.
By the way, the book that you were showing is like it's like a graphic novel for adults. Like there was which I think is fun because we respond to graphic novels just like kids do. So kids books have lots of pictures that engage them and tell the story and give it context. And frankly, I like those books too. So it's not a surprise that that book grabbed your attention. So I'll have to see if we have access to that in our digital library.
Mhm.
Um, so now, so that's how you got into visual thinking, and is that how you met Grant? Or how what's the thread there that got you to Grant?
Yeah, I should have had Grant's picture next to me, shouldn't I? Like that's who we're talking about. But hopefully, folks will know about Grant Wright. So Grant and I think we met at an IIBA event. So I was the communities director for my local area here in the UK, which is in Birmingham, and Grant was at one of the events, and we started to talk right there and then. But we had no idea we both had this shared passion for kind of visuals. And it was only probably a year later where I was presenting a talk, and Grant was in the audience, and I had hand drawn all of my visuals in my slides, and it really got the attention, I think, of Grant. And he came over to me afterwards, and he was like, "I love that," and I've been experimenting hand drawing stuff as well, and we just got talking, and we stayed in touch. He actually drew a sketch note of the talk and posted it on LinkedIn, and he got so much engagement. And I think that's when we realized we were onto something, that there is just something about hand-drawn visuals that people levitate towards. And so that was really the start of our journey together, and probably the foundations of what we now run, which is the Visual Jam, which is a community of visual thinkers.
Oh, that's great.
Hmm.
So for our audience, let's dive into this visual thinking. For someone who's never heard of that terminology before, how do you describe that to people?
Yeah, I mean, as the two words suggest, it's thinking visually, but that's not very useful because people are going to be thinking, well, that's great. I can see some pictures in my head, but how do I use that in the real world? So if anyone's working on agile projects, I try and sometimes use the analogy of agile and visual thinking. So agile is this umbrella term. It's not a methodology on its own. It's this umbrella term that then has frameworks within it. And so there's lots of agile frameworks. And similarly, visual thinking, you can think of it in the same way. It's this approach to working more visually, but we have different instances of visual thinking. So
Okay.
again, Wilhelmine, the lady who's written the book, her company have created a great white paper on this, and they have defined what they call the 5 visual thinking types. So I'll very quickly introduce those just for people who are listening and watching, because not all of these 5 types are going to be relevant for everything we do. So it really depends on the type of work that you're involved in. So one of the visual thinking types is the visual reporter. And the visual reporter is somebody who maybe they've heard a talk. You might see these people at conferences where they're drawing at the front of the room. So what they're doing is they're taking complex ideas, they're visualizing them and summarizing them in a visual format so others can understand it a lot easier. So that's a visual reporter. That's what they do. We've got the visual co-creator, and this is probably the one that I think a lot of BAs would probably be using as a stance, because the visual co-creator is somebody who brings together people and facilitates conversations, but using visuals. So a good example of this might be a retrospective. If anyone's ever run a retrospective or been part of a retrospective, we often have these visual metaphors that people use. Like, for example, the sailboat. There might be a boat, and we say, well, what's going to move the boat forward, what's the wind that's going to push us forward. So that's a metaphor. And then people put post-it notes on that visual. So the visual co-creator is someone who uses visuals to facilitate and co-create. We then also have the visual analyst, and the visual analyst is, again, probably a BA stance, because what we're doing there is we're using visual representation of complex concepts, but more from a business perspective. So this could be flow charts, for example, data flows. All of these popular charts that we use can be visualized. And the last two are the visual storyteller. Now, this is a great one, especially when you're presenting information. It's using visuals to articulate a message and present to people. And that's, again, one of my favorites that I often use. And then the last one is the visual designer, and probably one that you never really get to use unless you're a bit geeky like me and you want to digitize your visuals. And it's almost like a graphic designer who makes visuals look great, but in a digital format.
Wow, great breakdown.
Yeah, that's really helpful to understand. Visual thinking is not just a single thing, but you use the word stances, because these are all different ways that you can incorporate that. Why do you think visual thinking is important in the work that we do as business analysis professionals?
Yeah, I'll give a couple of examples. I mean, just to kind of bring this to life. So one of the things that a lot of us are suffering from is our lack of attention. Now, I'd love to run a poll right now to the people out there. I know we don't have that set up, but I'd love to know how many times someone's looked at their phone whilst they've been on this session already, right? And I'm pretty sure a few of us have, and I'm not going to embarrass anyone because I would be doing the same. But we're living in a distracted world. We've got all of this stuff around us that is pulling our attention. And if we think about social media, the whole industry is built on capturing people's attention. You know, that business model that these companies are using is built on our attention. So everyone's competing for our attention. And so as business analysts, our stakeholders are the same. You know, we've got to get them engaged in some way or other. And putting bullet points on a slide is only going to capture your attention for so long. And I'll ask you guys a question. So there's some research that was done recently by a lady called Gloria Mark. She's written a great book called Attention Span. She's probably the world's leading expert on attention spans because she studied it for the last 20 years. In her research, she found the average person's attention span is so long. How long do we think that was?
20 seconds.
20 seconds?
10.
10 seconds? Well, luckily, it's not quite that bad.
Okay, good.
Oh,
But it's close. It's 47 seconds.
Okay.
okay.
So the research she conducted was looking at how many seconds before we switch to another window on our desktop. And they monitored a whole bunch of professionals for a period of time, and they found 47 seconds was roughly the average. And that's backed up by lots of other research as well. Lots of other companies have done similar research, and it was around that kind of up to 1 minute. And no wonder TikTok's doing great, right? It's got that perfect amount of time to keep you engaged, and then you're on to the next thing. And so when our attention spans are shrinking so much, we've got to keep people engaged in some way or other. Now, I'm not saying visuals are the answer to everything, but I think when we switch things up a little bit, when we're using text and then we have some visuals and we have the confidence to use visuals and hand-drawn visuals, I think it really creates that atmosphere of engagement. And that's really why I personally use it. It's to change things up a little bit. But I think we're just visual creatures. You know, we take in visuals at a much faster rate than we do words. So our brain doesn't have to, I guess, battle so hard or process things so hard. So we're visual creatures, and the more we can feed that need, I think the better. So yeah, that's probably some of the science behind it. There was another really great case study I found recently over in South Africa. So citrus farming, it's kind of orange farming. They have lots of workers, the pickers of the fruit, who aren't very educated, and the farmers were trying to get them to sign contracts, their employment contracts. But these poor folks, they couldn't understand the text and all of that information. And so one of the attorneys, he decided to make a visual contract. And
Really?
so, yeah, and so they created almost like a booklet which had pictures in it, a bit like what you were saying, Susan, where we have almost like a visual novel. And they found the new process only took 40 minutes, 40 minutes, for somebody to go through the booklet and actually sign it, because it gave them everything they needed. And we see this again and again. I'm sure there are other popular brands out there, but IKEA is a great example. If you look at their instructions, they are so obvious, like how to put something together. You don't have to read reams and reams of text. So the brain is just wired for this stuff.
Oh, very good. So my team, we use visuals consistently in the business analysis space for here's a model or here's a process flow, or in data analytics, for example, here's some charts to illustrate a point. But you're talking about using hand-drawn visuals. How can a business analysis professional start experimenting with that and start including that in what they do?
Oh, shall we give it a go?
Try
Let's
it.
give it a go. All
Sure,
right,
yeah, we should.
Right. And folks out there, you can join in as well. So all you need is a piece of paper and a pen. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just a regular pen. Brilliant.
Right.
So, and anyone listening just to the audio version of this podcast, I'm going to describe the process so you can absolutely do it as well. So what we're going to do is I'm going to get you to scribble about 4 different scribbles. Now, let me just give you an example. So there's a scribble. It can be anything. So just let your hand move around a little bit and draw 4 separate scribbles without overthinking it too much. Okay. We all good?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Right. So now I'm just going to use a different colored pen just because it's a little bit easier to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn these scribbles into birds. Okay. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to draw a beak, an eye, some wings, and some feet. And I'm going to show you on the screen what I mean. So there's a beak. Oh, trying to figure it out. There we go. There's a beak, an eye that I put in, and the sort of the tail or the wings, and you can put the legs in. Now, I'd like you to do the same for all of the other scribbles, but with those, try putting them in completely different positions. So try not to just make the birds face one way. Maybe put the beak in the bottom right of that scribble and the legs kind of in the opposite direction. Yeah, so I'm going to just let you guys have a play with that. And then we'll see what you came up with.
I am not in any way an artist. So I don't know what this is going to look like.
Don't worry, Susan. We're gonna hopefully prove that you can draw. And then you're going to be dangerous because then you're going to be visualizing everything. You're going to be like
and then I'm going to be dangerous. Yeah, my grandmother actually was an artist, but I did not happen to get that. I didn't get that skill from her. So. Just her appreciation of art.
Right. Let me know when you guys are done.
Almost.
Don't think it too much. Don't overthink it.
I think I accidentally drew a penguin. Look at me.
That's okay. That's even better.
Yeah.
Penguins
He's
are
not
birds,
going to
right?
have wings. There we are.
Right. Would you like to share on the camera, and then we'll all share at the same time? Go on then. Let's see. Oh, there's mine. Okay.
Oh, those are good. Oh, you have an upside down bird even.
Yeah. So I just went crazy and I went, right, I'm gonna like stick the beak facing down and it's kind of this way. And because there's no rules, right? You could stick them in any position.
Yeah.
Have a look at yours.
All right, go for it. Oh, I can already tell Scott's are good.
Oh, look at them.
There's mine.
Yeah,
one was from above here. Oops.
Yeah.
Wrong side here.
Nice.
There's a couple of others. A fat bird.
I love it. I love the you've changed the wings a little bit, the design, which is super cool. right?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
All right. I only did 3 birds, and
That's okay.
also I should have gotten my Sharpie out. But here's my penguin over here.
Wait, look at that. I like that
Yeah.
one.
I told you I can't draw at all.
That's super cool. I love the beak on the second one. It's kind of almost open up like this.
Yes, maybe
Like
it's a
that.
baby.
Yeah. So hopefully you'll agree that if somebody saw what we've just put together and they kind of saw this, they'd go, oh, that's a bird, right? But it's not particularly artistic. So this is an activity called Squiggle Birds. And again, this is probably a really nice activity to do if you're a BA and you want to break the ice in a
Ah.
workshop. It's a great sort of little facilitation technique that you can use. But on a serious note, what we're proving here is just with a few scribbles and squiggles, we're able to create something that's recognizable by someone else without
Okay.
much effort. So it's not about the art, it's about the ideas that we're portraying. And so the human brain is great at pattern matching, because what the brain is thinking about is, where else have I seen something that has a beak and some wings? It doesn't really care about the body and all the scribbles that we've got there. It's just pattern matching with all of the other images that we've ever seen. A bit like AI. You feed it all these images and the brain is now thinking, I recognize that. So that's what we're aiming for with these techniques. So going back to your points, Scott, you mentioned, how easy is it for BAs to start using some of these techniques? It's super easy. Like when Grant and I sometimes run our visual thinking 101 sessions, we help people build that confidence in hand drawing. They walk away feeling super happy. I even had one dad who, he tagged me on Instagram and he went, Paddy, thank you so much. My kids think I'm so cool. Like, having done some of the visualization that you taught me. So it is, honestly, it's a skill that I think we can all learn for sure. If you can write, you can definitely do this.
Yeah, and I appreciate that because learning new skills. So, for example, I'm a YouTuber, and creating thumbnails is a critical part of that job. I have no graphic design background, but I've learned by watching what works well and what doesn't, and progressing over 4 or 5 years, getting better at that. So I'm not an expert at it, but I'm certainly doing much better than I ever used to. So practice does make perfect.
And Patty, before you joined us today, Scott and I were talking about our own experiences learning, being, how we can use visuals. So one of the things that we were talking about is the best way to learn how to use them is to look at other people's visuals and study them. What's good about this? What were you able to take away? What maybe was left that you would have done differently? And if you can talk with the creator of that, ask them why they use that. It's if you're learning if you want to be a good writer, you got to read a lot to see how people have written. And I think the same thing holds true. So if you are someone who isn't confident or don't know where to start, go and look at other people's visuals, not to necessarily copy them, but to find your style, to find what's comfortable for you, because you will have your own visual voice. You just have to do a little bit of work to figure out what it is.
Yeah, 100%. And there's a great website I always recommend for anyone who's starting off. It's called thenounproject.com. And it's freely available. And basically what you can do there is you can go in the little text box and you can type in any concept. So if I'm trying to visualize, I don't know, compliance, for example, I'm doing something about compliance. You type in the word and it will show you lots of little icons that are really simple to produce. And you can start to build up your icon library over time. And just to show that, there's another great book by Wilhelmine. Honestly, she doesn't pay me for promoting the books, but they're just so good. It's called My Icon Library, and it's a tiny little book. You can see sort of it's about the size of my hand. Yeah. And what this has, it has a bunch of icons for different terms. Again, similar sort of concept to having the noun project, but you can search in the index for like a concept. So for example, here we've got banking. So I might be visualizing banking and it gives me some really simple visuals I can use.
Oh, cool.
And it also breaks some of them down for you as well. So super, super useful. This is one of my go-to resources, especially when I'm struggling to visualize something. But the more you do it, the more, as you mentioned, you can look at other people's, but just spend even 5 minutes a day, just pulling out some random words and seeing if you can visualize it, and you'll build that muscle memory over time. And so
Yes.
now, we have our go-to icons when Grant and I are drawing live. Sometimes we kind of cheat because we know, like, this is how I'm going to visualize this. It's not done on the spur of the moment. Very rarely is it done that way.
Okay.
A lot of it is that preparation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, you were mentioning that resource. Is it Learn Now project?
Oh, the Noun project. Noun,
Noun.
as in Noun.
Okay.
We talk about learning as a muscle, and this is exactly what you're talking about, because I know it seems like, oh man, Paddy is um, Paddy is great at this. He can just come up with those visuals, but that didn't happen by accident. By the way, I think that banner should say the Noun
Yeah,
project. The
yeah,
first word
Oh,
is the.
the Noun.
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank
There
you.
we go.
Um, this didn't happen by accident. It wasn't as if today, you started and were just creating these great visuals. In fact, this is work that you've done. It is a muscle that you have built, and you've got now your style that you can immediately pull from. And let's talk about learning for just a second, because the process of doing what you are doing was probably a little frustrating and a little time consuming when you started, but that struggle is actually part of the learning process. You have to struggle in order to learn something, because your brain's got to make really important connections. And so now what seems very natural is just the fact that it is part of your experience. So you're able to pull from it much faster. So for those of you out there that are thinking, oh my gosh, I couldn't ever do it, start and push through the weirdness, and that it's slow and that it's hard, because it's worth it. It really is worth it.
100%. 100%. Can I just add a point to that, Suzanne? So
Yeah, yeah.
a couple of weeks ago, my boss, because everybody in my organization knows they should probably change my title to Chief Doodle Officer or something, because they only ever use me to draw stuff, right? And so she said, Paddy, the US team are going to get in touch with you. And I said, oh, great. Like, are they going to talk to me about Agile? And she was like, no. It's about AI, but we're pitching to a big client, multinational client, and we need a bit of your creative brain as part of the
Really?
pitch. So, long story short, I spent 2 days drawing this huge visual for the slide, and it was to bring the learner journey to life. Now, I had never done anything that big before, and for me, every time I have to do a presentation, I really look forward to it, because I know I'm going to learn some new visuals. I'm going to really test myself, and we kind of got that packed together, and the feedback's been amazing. Like, the client absolutely loved it, and it really set us apart from other competitors. Now, I hope we win the deal, but at least we made a big impression. And I think, like you say, it is hard work sometimes, but every time I do a presentation, I'll keep pushing myself a little bit further. The first presentation I did, I probably did one slide that I had drawn by hand, and then it slowly built up. I'm doing a presentation tomorrow to a client, and again, I've ripped up our corporate slides, and I've hand drawn a lot of the visuals. I hope my boss is not listening or watching this, but I'm confident it's going to land well. But we'll give it a go.
I am fascinated that your company appreciates this and actually sees your ability to do this visual communication as a competitive advantage. Isn't that amazing? One of the best jobs, one of the best CIOs I ever worked for, hired me specifically because I had a film background, not because I don't have a computer science background. Mine was in film, and he liked the fact that it was a different perspective from the other folks on that team, and we were able to leverage that. Um, this is just amazing. You work in an organization that realizes just how essential that skill is into engaging people in ways that probably their competitors can't. So that's incredible.
And the irony of that, Susan, is we've just done a new brand launch today of our new logo as a company, and we've revamped our whole website. And I was in a photo shoot last week. Sounds very
Oh my
grand.
gosh, you're a supermodel.
No, trust me, I'm not. I think they took 120 pictures and they chose one. So that's how bad I am in front of the camera. And the picture they chose is of me holding up a pen, and I've kind of got it on my chin like this, because when they were doing the session, they're like, Paddy, we want your personality to come out, right? So I could just stand there like that and just look, formal. And then I spotted this pen. I was like, what if I grab the pen? And they were like, yeah. So I did a LinkedIn post today, actually. So if you check out my LinkedIn today, I put the picture on the post to show what we did, and they put it on the website. So it was super cool. The fact that they were ready to embrace the personality. I just think that was phenomenal. And I think largely most organizations are, right. We're sometimes afraid to show our personality, thinking,
Yeah.
how are people going to take that? When I think leaders are human, right? And so, another question I often get asked is, how do other people react when you start doodling instead of presenting PowerPoint slides? And I'm like,
Yeah.
I've never had anyone walk out my presentation till now. Like, always been received really well. So I think we can definitely test the water and then push the boundary a little bit more.
Well,
Yeah.
I can see that, because you that are sketching and doodling, you're providing a form of entertainment at the same time as getting your message across. It's like you said at the very start of this. It's not like pulling bullets on a PowerPoint slide. It's very different, very engaging, and sort of. I learned in adult education, from what I've been taught, that movement is really important in engaging the human. So just the nature of doing this in front of someone has much more impact than someone that's standing there and just talking.
100%. And Scott, I totally agree with you. And look, I'm not suggesting we all go out and just start drawing amazingly. Like, you can do some basic stuff. So one tip I would give anyone who's thinking about going on this journey is, in PowerPoint, there's a hidden tool. It's an annotation tool that many people don't get to use or discover. And so what I sometimes do is I'll have my slide and I'll use the annotation tool, and all I'll do is I'll highlight words as I'm talking, right? So it's not me drawing anything. I'm literally just emphasizing certain words on the slide. And that really just creates this additional curiosity. Like, people are going, I'm going to focus on that thing because you've highlighted it and the movement's there. And in other instances, when you sometimes have got a visual, but you haven't finished it, I'll sometimes have half-finished visuals, and then as I'm talking, I'll put some facts and figures and write them in onto the slide as we're going along. So the brain is really curious to go, I wonder what's going to go in that gap. Like, there's definitely something that's missing there. And so there's that anticipation. So there's lots of little tips and tricks that I think people can use to just start to build that confidence.
Yeah, I've heard about that a lot in my YouTube study. There's something called a curiosity gap.
Mhm.
So when the human brain is curious about something, they tend to tune in more. So I can see that you've got this obvious empty space. What's going on there?
Yeah.
Exactly what that is.
Oh gosh. Okay, so this is amazing. It's an amazing conversation, and I can see folks in our live feed are really enjoying this. Maybe let's take a couple of questions. So remember, we're live. So if you've got questions, pop those into chat. So we've got our first question here. This is from Mary. She's joining us on YouTube. So in your experience, do people respond to visual communication better than verbal? I've seen visuals to compare the differences between agile and traditional methods. And I think she was going back to your discussion about the agile when you were breaking down the frameworks that are underneath agile.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm all for all sorts of communication. I think we've sometimes got to try multiple modes, right? Because we're all different. Now, there is a condition, I forget the actual condition, but there's actually a condition that it's a rare condition that people have where they can't think visually, right? So we had a guest on one of our Visual Jam community sessions, and he was telling us his wife has this condition. And so if you say to her, imagine a glass with water flowing out of it, she can't visualize that. She just wouldn't get it. And so we've got to be cognizant of people's backgrounds, and so not everybody is going to think the same as us. And there's a study called is called dual coding theory, and this is by Professor Alan Pavio, and he found that when we use words, they're kind of sticky, but when we supplement them with visuals, what ends up happening is they become twice as powerful, because what we're doing is we're apparently in the brain, I'm not an expert on the brain, but apparently both visuals and the words, they're going into the same channel in the brain. And so when you're putting twice the information, the same information, you're putting it in twice in two different ways, it's really cementing that in the brain. So using visuals and words are super powerful. Using visuals on their own, I wouldn't recommend it, because they're sometimes open to interpretation unless we're creating curiosity, right? So that's another purpose of visuals, is sometimes we don't want to give the answer. We're just creating curiosity in something, then great, use a visual. But also use them with caution. And there's a great example one of my good friends gave me. He said, although visuals are a universal language, right? So most cultures understand the symbols in the same way. So if I said, oh, we're going to draw a light bulb, what would come to mind, Scott?
Light bulb that's round, traditional light bulb?
Like what concept do you think I would be depicting with a light bulb? Idea, right? And yourself, Suzanne, does anything else come to mind?
Maybe inspiration.
Right? Something positive, innovation, these sort of concepts. I'm pretty sure a lot of different cultures would come up with those. However, there are some that aren't as universal. So imagine when we're talking about something going great, we draw the sun. The sun shows happiness. Well, that's not going to work in a country where they're facing drought. For them, rain is good.
Oh.
Right? So these visuals, there are certain nuances sometimes you've got to be careful on and just really know your audience. But to go back to the point, I think the question was, is verbal better than visuals? I would say they're both as important as each other, although studies show that people remember more having seen a visual than they do through verbal words, because the way we learn, we find that visuals are much more sticky following a training session.
Okay. I've got a question for you, Paddy. When I'm thinking of a concept or working through a problem, I tend to grab a piece of paper and just start drawing the shapes. It's typically Venn diagrams or whatever, but that's sort of the way I process getting my thought to something meaningful. Is there anything related to that? Is that a thought process? Is that a visual thinker? Any thoughts on why that is?
Yeah, so the question is around, why do you sort of find having that kind of structure, that visual structure, helps you? Is that the question? I think it goes back to kind of how we're wired. Like when we were cave people, how did we communicate before we could really talk? We had those cave paintings and drawings on the wall. And the way we passed information from one generation to another was through visuals. And it's just so deeply ingrained within us that, you know, the brain looks for visuals. It's constantly hunting for something visual because it can take it in so much faster. I think it was something like, I've got the stat here. It's something like we process visuals 60 times faster than text.
Really?
Yeah.
Right. So I sometimes actually run a little exercise when I'm doing a live session, and I put a small paragraph of writing on the slide. It's literally 4 lines. And I give people about 10 seconds and I say, right, I want you to count the number of F's that you see. 9 times out of 10, I never get agreement from the room in terms of that number. Some people say 3, 4, 5, 6. And it's very rare that I'll ever get agreement. I don't think I ever have. And that's such a simple example of a bunch of letters. We're all seeing them, but the brain is processing them at different speeds. And so then I say to people, imagine you're now in a PowerPoint presentation and you've got paragraphs of writing. How much of that is actually sticking? Because if you can't even count the number of F's on 4 lines of text, imagine how hard it is for the brain to take all that other information. So as I say, a picture paints 1,000 words, and I think using visual metaphors can be super, super powerful. You know, when we're describing a concept, like if I was saying, you know, the ideas are flooding in, they're flooding in like a river, right? Straight away we're thinking, I can picture that. It must be, you know, there's just an explosion of ideas. Like we can use all this metaphorical language to really get people to start thinking and thinking in a different way.
Yeah, so sometimes the visual communication isn't necessarily the pictures, but it's using the words that will invoke those images, common sets of images. I like talking about the appropriateness of visuals too, because that can matter in your communications, but also a balance. I know one of the tools that we have, or I'm sorry, one of the comments that we have here, we may not have time to completely answer this question. What's the key to a good visual PowerPoint? And I think what I've heard you say so far is I think it's a balance of images and maybe text. You need to know what's important. It's images that make sense to your audience. What else would you recommend for thinking about a good visual PowerPoint or slide
So
deck?
I've got an example for this, and we couldn't have a tech type of talk without mentioning Google. So I'm going to mention Google. So Sundar Pichai, the head honcho there at Google, he has made a big point of bringing in storytelling and bringing more visuals into presentations. So Googlers are told they need to use more visuals in their presentations. So some researchers did some analysis on one of his presentations, and they found that in his 14 slides that he was presenting, there were only 40 words in the entire presentation. Everything else was visuals. And they say the average person has 40 words within the first 2 slides of most presentations.
Oh my gosh.
So like I've got to take some direction here from Google. You know, they are smart people. They know what they're doing, and say, look, reduce the words as much as possible. I think the mistake we often make is when we're producing a presentation, we're trying to use it to serve multiple purposes, and it's not designed for multiple purposes. It's a presentation tool. It's not the documentation. And I often see that where, you know, BAs are presenting requirements and they've put paragraphs of writing in the presentation because they're presenting the requirements. They want to get every detail in there. But you can give people the actual document to refer to, the details in there. What I'm going to do is bring those to life. And I could do that through a story. I could give a scenario and say, hey, here's Joe. Joe is trying to do this today. The problem she's having is this. How we're going to fix it is through this feature. That's a simple story. We could tell that visually, and it doesn't really require a lot of words. And so we've sometimes got to change that mindset shift of what is the intention of me doing the PowerPoint presentation? Because if it is the document, then I can just email it to someone and they can read it, come back with questions. I'm adding no value by reading through 20 paragraphs of writing in a presentation. And going back to the question on AI tools, I'm going to do a post on this, actually. I found this most amazing AI tool. I don't think many people have heard of it because it's just come out. It's called Catalyst. Catalyst.ai, I think it's called, with a K. And it's absolutely remarkable. You can go in and you can tell it a story that you want to tell, or give it a scenario. I actually gave it a BA scenario. I said, there's a young boy, and this young boy has always wanted to become a business analyst, and he meets a mentor along his journey, and they have a few challenges along the way. Anyway, it then creates all of these slides for you, AI generated.
Oh my gosh.
And you can go and you can tweak them. They've got characters in there. They've got all this stuff. And they've just added another really cool feature. You can now convert everything into a video. So every slide becomes a mini video, and it's super engaging. So I'm going to do a post on this.
Okay.
If anyone wants to get in touch, give me some scenarios and I will put them through this tool and I'll post it on LinkedIn for you. And we'll see what we come out with, because I'm super excited about it.
Okay.
So for those folks listening in today, connect with Paddy on LinkedIn, and Grant too, because I'm sure he posts all equally interesting things on visual thinking.
I have to say one thing, Suzanne. Grant's artistic capability is it's amazing. Like I'm in awe of his visuals. I see his visuals and it just blows my mind. So I've got to give him massive credit. He is Mr. Artist. Honestly, he's absolutely amazing. I'm on the other side of the spectrum. I do simple stuff. I do the squiggle birds and just add a little bit of finesse. So I'm
Oh
not
my
at that
gosh.
level.
Okay.
Well, hey, listen, Patty, I'm so glad we could finally get connected and have you join us today. It was truly every bit as fantastic as Scott and I thought it would be. So thank you for joining us.
Yes,
Oh,
thank
no
you.
dancing today, guys. That was the thing, right? No
Yeah,
dancing.
no dancing, but I keep hearing and seeing videos from these different conferences all over the world. Fabricio Laguna has been taking the BA boogie out across Europe. I think it's on all continents except Antarctica these days. So who knows? If you're seeing Fabricio at conferences, you're going to be dancing. And I know you were dancing at BBC recently too. We've actually got that video somewhere on LinkedIn. Yeah, you and Grant and a crew that were dancing at our booth.
Yeah, well, let's not talk about that. Yeah.
It happened. All
Yeah.
right,
Well, thank you,
Patty.
Patty. It's been a pleasure having you here, and thank you for sharing your wisdom on this topic. It's been great.
Such a fantastic talk today. Thank you so much. Well, we are wrapping up for today, but we'll be back as always in 2 weeks. We're going to be talking about crafting effective queries for AI. You're probably wondering, how can I make these tools give me stuff that I want? Well, part of that is knowing how to craft the prompts that you're using. And so we've got a guest that'll talk us through that. So we will see you 2 weeks from today. Thanks for joining us.